Hello and welcome back to another Age of Sigmar painting tutorial. In this video I'll be tackling the avian-like beastmen known as the Tzaangors from the Warhammer Quest Silver Tower box set. And as always I'll be using the Citadel range of paints to do so. So here we have the Tzaangor that I'll be painting as part of this tutorial, and as you can see I've already primed it with a grey spray primer. Now I've used the Army Painter's Uniform Grey Primer for this, however you could use any generic acrylic primer. Now the first step in painting this miniature is to tackle all of the skin areas. This includes the arms, the chest, the legs, and also the tabard there just in the front there. However, you don't need to concentrate too much on these tendrily things that are coming out the back of the head. I'm painting all of these areas with Celestra Grey. As Celestra Grey is a base paint, it should be quite easy to paint over the grey primer that we've got here. So I'm just painting quite liberally at this stage. We don't need to be too neat, we just need to make sure we're getting nice and even coverage across the skin. The next step in painting the skin is to wash over the skin areas with Guilliman Blue. Using the Guilliman Blue straight out of the pot is a little bit too strong, so I've mixed in 1 part Lamian Medium to 1 part Guilliman Blue. As you can see, when I apply it to the skin, it's not quite as bright. However, we still get this nice blue tone on the skin. So now that we've completed the blue on the rest of the body, we've got this nice kind of blue hue to the skin, we're going to be darkening the feet and also the legs with a wash of Drankenhof Nightshade. By applying this wash to these lower areas, we'll get a much darker skin colour, which will contrast nicely against the lighter chest and arm areas. And you can see here I'm just washing over it, making sure that all the wash pulls into the recesses. Now that the wash is dried, the next step is to start highlighting the lighter areas of the skin and also the tabard there. And for this we'll be using Ulthuan Grey. So for this step we're going to want to focus on picking out some of the raised areas of the skin, such as just along the fingers here. Just going to be very carefully dragging the brush along the skin, just to create a nice highlight. The next step in painting the skin is to highlight the darker blue areas with Blue Horror. So as we did in the last highlight, I'm just going to be focusing on some of these upper edges just around the ankle here, just going up the leg as well. Just be applying these very thin lines across the leg. The next step is to paint the tendrils on the back of the head here and any feathers across the miniature, and for this we'll be basing it with Incubi Darkness. As this is a base paint, you should have no problem with its application. You can see it goes on quite nicely. I'm just being careful to avoid overspilling onto the skin that we've already painted. Just being very careful around these areas. The next step in painting both the tendrils and also the feathers here is to apply a thin line of Cabalite Green. Now when applying the Cabalite Green, we want to just focus a very thin line along these top edges. It's quite difficult to define the edge with it being round, but you can just about see what I mean here by applying this thin line. And we'll be doing the same along this top section of the tendril as well. Doing this across all the tendrils and also the feather as well. So next we'll be painting some extreme highlights onto the tendrils and also the feather, and for this we'll be using Sybarite Green. So this time around we'll be focusing our highlights mainly on the top sections of these tendrils, just doing a very, very thin line, thinner than the lines we performed in the last step. Just about to see painting one there, and also on this tendril as well. The next step of painting our Tzaangor is to paint the horns and also the beak, and for this we'll be using Rakov Flesh. The next step in painting the horns and also the beak there is to apply some Moumfang Brown to the tops of the horn and also the tip of the beak, and we'll be applying a glaze, so we'll be mixing in with a small amount of Lamian Medium. For this step I've mixed in equal parts Moumfang Brown to Lamian Medium. I'm just going to be starting at the top of the horns and working my way down. As you can see here, it's getting thinner and thinner as I move down the horn, and then around about the midpoint we're going to start tapering it off, and this gives us this nice kind of blend from the dark brown to the light brown at the bottom. The next step in painting the horns is to pick out the very tips of the horns with Abaddon Black. To finish off the gradient on the horns here, I've mixed in just a small amount of water into the black. I'm just going to be picking out the very tips. In order to improve the definition in the horns, especially at the bottom there we've got the Rakov Flesh and also around the beak, we'll be washing these areas with Seraphim Sepia. By applying this wash to the horns, you can see here we're getting some nice definition inside the ridges. You can see I'm being quite liberal in my application, just spreading it out more towards the top of the horns. Now the final step in painting the horns is to just pick out some of the ridges on the horns there, and for this we'll be using Screaming Skull. Now when performing this highlight we want to focus our attention just to the top ridge, just going up the top of the horn here. We're going to be tapering off as we get further up the horn, like so. Just picking out these raised sections. The next step in painting our Tzaangor is to paint the insides of the armor panels that we've got here, and first we'll be basing them with Caledor Sky. When painting these areas, it can be a little bit tricky too, but do try to avoid painting the trim, as it makes it a lot easier to paint the gold lining later on. You can see I'm just being careful to apply this in here. Now this is a base paint, so as you can see it's actually applying quite nicely over the grey. Don't really need to do much here, but I have mixed in a very small amount of water just to improve the flow. The next step in painting the armour of our Tzaangor is to highlight the armour plates with Temple Guard Blue. For this step I've mixed in a very small amount of lamy medium, or alternatively you could use a little bit of water, and I'm just going to be focusing my efforts towards the top of these armour panels. You can just about see here I'm just creating a nice gradient as it gets further towards the bottom there. I'll be doing this across the miniature wherever these armour plates are. The next step in painting our armour is to wash over it with Guilliman Blue. When applying this wash, I would recommend mixing in 2 parts Guilliman Blue to 1 part Lamium Medium, or water if you don't have any of the medium, and I'm just going to be washing this over the blue panels in the armour. Now this will blend in the 2 layers that we painted in the previous steps, and also provide a small amount of shading in the recesses. And the great thing about the blue colour is that it won't dull the really bright blue armour that we're going for here. The final step in painting our armour, now that the wash has dried, is to perform a very extreme highlight of Baharaf Blue. When applying this highlight, we're going to be focused on some of the more extreme edges, such as the crest just along the top of the knee here, and just painting a very thin line just where the edge forms. With the armour panels complete, the next step is to paint the hilts on the weapons there, and also any straps such as these on the face here, and then also those just on the back of the leg there as well. And we're painting all of these areas with Rhinox Hide. Painting these areas should be no problem whatsoever, as this is a base paint, so it should cover really nicely. However, do be very careful, especially when painting near the hands here, not to overspill. The next step in painting the straps and also the handles is to highlight them with Gorthor Brown. Now as you can see on the handle here, we have these raised sections. We're just going to be picking these out with the Gorthor Brown, just creating thin lines just along the top of the crest there. The next step in painting our Tzaangor is to paint the sheath of any blades that the Tzaangor may have, such as this one here, and also the talons and the claws on the Tzaangor as well. I'm painting all of these areas with Abaddon Black. So as you can see here, I'm just going to be painting the central part of the sheath there, leaving the gold detailing still visible, keeping that grey, so it makes it a lot easier to paint it later on. Just being careful around this area, especially when painting near the cloth as well. Once the black has dried, the next step is to highlight the edges using Dark Reaper. So for this highlight, I'm just going to be picking out the top sections of the talons just at the bottom here. Just making a thin line along the top. And then also on the blade here, I'm just going to be focusing the highlight along the side edges of the sheath. The final highlight for the talons and also the sheath is going to be a very fine highlight of Thunderhawk Blue. So in much the same way as we did in the previous step, I'm just going to be focusing this highlight on the very tips of the talons themselves, just doing a very, very thin line. And the same way we come to the sheath here, I'm just going to be focusing on this middle ridge along the blade there as well. With the sheath and the talons completed, the next step is to move on to painting any of the glass orbs that we can see in the weapons, any of the eye motifs and gems that we've got scattered across the miniature. And we're painting all of these areas with Cabalite Green. Now, even though Cabalite Green isn't a base paint, you should have no problem covering over this grey primer that we've got here. You can just see I'm just picking out this gem on this kind of a Tzeentch motif there, and also just at the bottom of these blades, and also just at the top there as well. The next step in painting the eyes and also the gems is to apply a highlight of Sybarite Green. So for this step we'll be painting the same areas as we did in the last step. However, we'll be focusing on the upper sections. You can see I'm just painting on this gem, just the top part there, and also these just on the hilts of the weapons, just focusing on the areas that are towards the top of the miniature. The final step in painting the lenses on the miniature is to do an extreme highlight along the top with Gorse Blaster Green. Now this time around we just want to focus on the very, very tips. As you can just about see, I'm doing on this gem here, and then I'll be doing it on the same across all of the gems on the miniature, focusing on the very tops, like so. Next we'll be painting the eye of the Tzaangor, and for this we'll be painting the inside with Carrick Stone. So by using a very thin brush, I'm just going to be base coating the eye with the Carrick stone, just making sure I completely cover the eyeball and the socket there. And then we're doing the same on the other side as well. Now, in order to give the eye a yellow glow, we're going to be washing over it with Cassandora Yellow. By applying the Cassandora wash over the Carrick stone base, we'll get this nice glowing effect on the eye. And even if you overspill around the eyelid, it's not too bad, as it kind of gives this nice glowing effect. Now, one of the final areas we'll be painting before moving on to the metallic areas is the feathers that we've got on the chest, so you can just about make them out there. And we'll be base coating these first of all with Wild Rider Red. For this step, we'll just be picking out these tufts of feathers that are emanating from the chest and also the shoulders there. Just being very careful not to overspill onto the skin areas that we've already painted. So in order to give the feathers a little bit more definition and improve the brightness of them a little bit, which will contrast really nicely against the blue skin, I'll now be performing a second highlight of Fire Dragon Bright. So unlike the previous step where we just focused on the entirety of the feather, we'll just be picking out the very tips here, just with the Fire Dragon Bright, which creates a nice kind of bright orange colour on the feathers. So now we can start painting the metallic areas on the miniature now that we've completed the feathers. And for this we'll be using Lead Belcher, and we're focusing on the weapon blades for this. As Lead Belcher is a base paint, you should have no problem covering over the grey areas that I've got here on the weapons, as well as the blades that we've got on these hand weapons. We also have the chain going across the waist there just on this particular miniature. With the base coat down for the metal areas, the next step is to perform a second layer using Iron Breaker. So this time we'll be focusing our efforts along the upper sections of the blade, and we want to get a nice and bright blade effect going on here, so we're going to be focusing along the very edge just at the bottom here as well. The next step in painting our Tzaangor is to paint all of the gold areas, which you can probably see are all the areas that are remaining grey at the moment, and for this we'll be using Retributor Armour. Retributor Armour is a base paint, which means you should have no problem in picking out all of the gold areas along this miniature, and there are quite a few of them. As you can see here, it makes this really nice and bright gold. So once you've finished applying all of the gold base layer across the miniature, the next step is to wash over it, and for this we'll be using Seraphim Sepia. Personally, I find Seraphim Sepia to be an excellent wash for gold areas because it applies shading in the recesses. You can see I'm getting from applying it to this gold areas here. However, it keeps the nice kind of gold tone, it doesn't dull it down too much. So I'll be applying this wash across all of the gold areas that we painted in the previous step. The final step in painting our Tzaangor is to highlight both the steel metal and also the gold metal areas with Moumfang Steel. The great thing about Moumfang Steel is the fact that its brightness allows us to really simulate the reflective properties of shiny metal. So you can see here on the metal blade I'm just picking out these edges, especially along this ridge and also the bladed edge itself. You probably can't see it really well due to the reflection. Just picking it out like so. Now when we actually come to paint the metallic areas, the gold areas, sorry, we want to just focus this highlight on the very tip. So you can see I'm just picking out these spines here and also on the tips of the metal there as well. And here we have the completed Tzaangor, who you can see I've based already. Now whilst this tutorial focused mainly on the guy with two hand weapons, you could apply the same techniques to the Tzaangors with a shielded weapon or a two-handed weapon instead. Now if you enjoyed this tutorial, do let me know in the comments below, and also subscribe to be kept up to date with any future tutorials that I do. Additionally, if you would like to support me in making more tutorials, you can do so by heading over to my Patreon page, which you can find a link to in the description below. And right there you can donate to me from as little as $1 a month, and that'll just help to support me in making any future content. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.